Hello, everybody. Good afternoon by a whisker, just past midday. I hope you've all had a worthwhile, useful morning. My name is Dominic Finn. I'm the head of transport here at Climate Group. I lead our global transport work with our flagship initiative is EV100, which is a network of around 120 companies committed to procuring only electric vehicles, zero-emission vehicles, by different deadlines. And we're working with these companies to try to work out how do they transition to fully electric fleets, and how do we get the right policies in place. And the topic we're going to cover today around the grid is really pertinent. It's coming up more and more from our members, and it's an increasingly current issue, pardon the pun, more broadly, not just within our community as well. So really looking forward to a great discussion today. We've got representatives from utilities, from grid providers, also from government perspective into federal government as well, as service providers, company Arcadis helping other corporates to deliver a grid upgrade. So we've got lots of experts who will be joining us shortly. Before then, I just wanted to provide a little bit of context for the session and why it's important. So I mentioned our network with Climate Group of EV100 members really pressing ahead with the EV transition, but this is not a transition that's happening exclusively within the corporate world, of course. Just to step back for a moment and reflect how far we've come in the EV transition over recent years. 23% of new vehicles sold in the first half of this year were electric. That's up from 15% a couple of years ago. We're seeing this trend not just unfold in advanced markets, but in places like Vietnam, and where 35% of new vehicles sold are now electric. In Indonesia, Thailand over 20%. EU and North America marked as kind of traditional areas where this transition is being led continue, but this is really unfolding as a global transition. Party time next door, is it already? And it's also happening across different vehicle segments. Is a really important point to make, and particularly pertinent for this topic today. Heavy goods vehicles. The projections are that 4% of global sales of trucks will be electric by the end of this year. So the transition is accelerating, and it's global, and it's now different vehicle segments. So this is really encouraging, but what are the implications for the grid? How do we make sure that the increased demand for electricity from vehicles goes hand in hand with grid modernization, optimization? It's a huge challenge if we look close to home here in the US. In line with current projections, the grid would need 185 terawatts of increased capacity to meet projected energy demand just from electric vehicles. And alongside that, we have to electrify everything. Of course, we're at Climate Week, and we're looking at how do we decarbonize steel production, concrete, food. Everything needs to be decarbonized, and everything needs to be electrified. And then alongside that, we have the rise of data centers, which are set to double in energy demand by 2030 at least. So there's a lot of headaches for utilities and grid operators to contend with if they're going to meet increased energy demand. How do we ensure the EV transitions unfold smoothly, but alongside all these other competing demands for increased energy? And we're going to dig into all that today in the discussion. But just to say that there is a risk, that all the benefits of the EV transition, whether that's cleaner air or reduced emissions, but also the really strong economic benefits to the EV transition around, industrial competitiveness, job creation, which are all going to come through having a really strong electric vehicle industry. Indigenous electric vehicle industry is under threat unless we get this right. So we're going to circle around some of the big challenges and the opportunities around this agenda. Some of the challenges, like currently, and this is speaking from my experience with members who, as I mentioned, we're increasingly talking about this, who have, I guess, taken a lot of the low-hanging fruit in terms of charging infrastructure. Now they're looking at their depots and workplaces. It's worth noting that 70 to 80% of charging takes place at either workplace or home. Depots are really, really important. And just to put it into perspective, to a kind of a medium-sized depot might have the same energy requirements as a sports stadium to charge heavy goods vehicles. It's a huge challenge. So companies are really bumping up against this now, and and this is not just a US issue. We have projects everywhere, and there's kind of a lot of common kind of challenges that are faced around how do you ensure that the process is swift. There's not massive delays in getting permit and approval. That the distribution level kind of provisions for depots getting the electricity from the transmission into the depots is swift. There's delays around that as well. Something around coordination. There's new conversations needed between stakeholder groups which aren't used to speaking to each other, whether it's utilities and regulators, fleets, and other stakeholders. It's part of what the discussion is about today, to bring different voices together. But these conversations need to happen more and more. As an equity issue, how do we make sure that no one's left behind in this EV transition? That grid upgrade and modernization happens to serve everybody, not just in pockets where there's wealth or investment. And then, of course, the context for the whole of Climate Week. How do we move away from fossil fuels and move to clean energy? How do we integrate clean energy into the grid is a big element as well. So we're going to talk around a lot of these issues with some experts. So with that, I would like to welcome Carla J. Peterman to the stage, who's the Executive Vice President of Corporate Affairs and Chief Sustainability Officer for PG&E. Carla spent a career focused on California's energy policy and regulatory landscape, so looking forward to hearing about that. And she oversees the company's sustainability and charitable strategies as well. So warm welcome, Carla. Great to have you join us for this conversation, and look forward to hearing your perspective.
Thanks, Dominic. Good morning. Good morning, everybody.
So to start with quite a broad question for you, Carla. When we think about the EV transition, what does it represent for PG&E? Obviously, you've got a commercial interest. It's a very core of your business. But I wonder, how do you see the kind of landscape? And I've tried to crudely set the scene for this agenda. I wonder if you had any gaps to fill that I might have missed, and from a PG&E perspective.
Sure. So first of all, we are happy to be a part of EV 100 as we're working to electrify our own fleet. And we serve 1 in 8 electric vehicles in this country or in our service area. And a part of our mission statement is serving the planet. So focusing on EVs is an entire part of our business strategy. And one aspect that gets us really excited is around the opportunity for electric vehicle growth to drive overall electricity affordability. We know affordability is top of mind as it relates to electric rates, as we've seen rates go up around the country. And so for us, the more electric vehicle load we can bring on the system, that allows for more spreading of some of the fixed infrastructure costs. We've been investing in infrastructure in order to climate-proof the system. And the more kilowatt hours we sell, we can spread some of those fixed costs across different customers. And so actually, we're anticipating for every 1 million electric vehicles we can bring on the grid, and it's using our currently underutilized infrastructure that can drive down residential rates up to 2 to 3%. Because we've got this unique grid where we built it for peak, but it's used on average about 45% of the day. So if we can bring on that load, which we know is flexible, and charge it at times we've already got capacity, that can be a real win for EV drivers in terms of the rate they receive, and also for all customers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's fascinating. And as I said, kind of, you're at the center of the EV transition. And you talked a bit from PG&E's perspective, but from a utilities perspective more broadly, what do you think the biggest mindset shift that's needed in order to do what we need to do to modernize the grid and optimize it, to get in shape for what's needed, what's to come?
Well, I was mentioning that we have overall capacity on the grid, but we have areas that are capacity constrained at certain times of the day. And so the mind shift for us, which is a mind shift all utilities need, is how our engineers think about meeting a customer's demand. So the historical way of thinking is, I need to meet your demand 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days. If I can't meet it then, I'm going to say, thank you, but no thank you. Come back when I can meet your needs. So we had this mentality, and we started talking to folks who wanted to do big DC chargers or bring semi-electric trucks on. And we said, okay, we cannot serve you for 3 to 5 years. That was a non-starter for fleets that are trying to electrify. And so what we how we started to approach it differently was to say, okay, how can we use software that allows us to optimize charging to serve as much as this need as much as possible? So we have a product now called Flex Connect, and I'll give you the example of Pepsi in Fresno, California, as a good way we've deployed that technology. So Pepsi wanted to bring on 50 electric semi trucks, and we had the capacity to bring on 30 in the system. So we said, what would need to be true to bring on the additional 20 vehicles? And by using this Flex Connect software, using smart technologies like DERMS, et cetera, we were able to provide the megawatt hours they needed for most hours of the day, and then work with them to reduce consumption at those few hours during the year where we couldn't meet their need. That meant they could bring on those additional 20 trucks 18 months ahead of schedule. It saved $1 million in fueling costs, and then it saved thousands of pounds in CO2 emissions. So sometimes when you actually talk to your customer and you say, okay, here's where I can meet you, they've got more flexibility on their end than sometimes is apparent from that first conversation.
Yeah, so we're not talking about grid upgrade, we're talking about optimization of what's already there.
Yep.
And I suppose electric vehicles have a really key role to play in supporting that in the way that other technologies wouldn't, because they can feed back into the grid and they can load balance, etc. So is that part of the software that you're introducing and that allows that? Would it be classed as vehicle to grid as well? Yeah.
So you're right. That's another opportunity with EVs is the vehicle to grid. But what I'm talking about is just even when you have capacity constraints, even if they're not exporting to the grid, there's ways to manage the charging in a more sophisticated way. And I think that buys us all time. We've got to move forward on our clean energy agenda. At the same time, being mindful of affordability, there's a certain pace of execution. So on the vehicle to grid, that's a whole other area we're excited about that provides an additional value stream for the customer. We've got in our service area the largest vehicle to grid project. It's the Oakland Unified School District electric buses, and it's a partnership with Zoom. And the Oakland school bus fleet has been fully electrified. It's connected to our grid. It's exporting like 2.1 megawatt hours annually to the grid. And school buses are great, right? Because they are driving during the times in the morning and the afternoon. But when we actually need them to export to the grid, they're sitting there. It allows for also a cleaner experience for our communities. And so especially doing this in some of our communities that are historically disadvantaged ends up being a win. And we're learning how these types of fleets can participate in our markets.
I suppose also I've heard some examples in the UK with the First Bus, which is a bus company, and their usage patterns are very different from corporate fleets. So the charging infrastructure can also be used all the time, but by different companies, and then you can kind of business models emerged out of that then for the renting out charging infrastructure. So yeah, there's a lot of these kind of other kind of commercial opportunities that come out perhaps aren't immediately visible. So yeah, obviously within PG&E, but before that you've spent a long time in regulation, looking at regulation. I wonder what lessons you've carried from your regulatory career into your role, into your current role, and how might those lessons help ensure that utilities of all kinds are ready to support the EV transition?
Sure. So I had the privilege of, when I was a regulator, helping to design and get authorized several electric vehicle programs. And I'll say we were talking about vehicle to grid over a decade ago. And one of the lessons I have from that time is we were very quickly focused on how do you get customers to want to participate and provide grid services, and thinking about who's in charge of what, roles and responsibilities, market design. Well, before anyone can participate in a grid service, you actually have to want to own the vehicle, and we still have a ways to go with that. Right? We know that 80% of customers look at electric vehicles as a choice, but 27% end up purchasing them. So there is something that is happening in that process. And so what I'm bringing from that experience is how important it is just to have the right primary customer experience where the customer wants to adopt, whether it's electric vehicle or building electrification, and then being able to participate in some type of demand response program, a wholesale market program can be the icing on the cake, but it's not a significant enough driver to have someone want to adopt an electric vehicle for that reason. So yes, we've got to figure out what those market designs look like, but we all need to be all in on just getting the vehicles purchased in the first place.
Yeah. I mean, just to back a little bit, you mentioned PepsiCo and Zoom. How have your conversations quite different now with customers like that? You're having a different kind of conversation with them around when it comes to electric vehicles. You must be. And is it? It's about what's your energy demand? What would your energy demand be? Are you helping to calculate that? Is your software helping to calculate that? I was wondering how the conversations are changing with your customers.
Well, I'll say it's even more basic than software. It's let's have a conversation with our customers. Sometimes utilities historically haven't always been the first to have a conversation with their customers. We used to have a process: customer wanted new load, they fill out a form, they send it in, we look at it, we send it back, it's not right. They try to fix it, they send it back, it's not right. And so now it's like, okay, let's sit down at a table, tell me what your needs are. Because a customer might come in and say, I need this many megawatts of power. But when you really break it down, they need a certain amount in the first year, a certain amount in the second. And you start to realize where is their flexibility on the utility side, where's their flexibility on the customer side. So we have been just investing more time in having conversations with the customers early on and inviting them to meet us early on. Part of that is a trust. Do they believe that if they come to us, we're going to listen? I hope that our customers are starting to see our willingness to do so. And then there's customers who don't even come. They think they can't electrify because there's not capacity. And it's more nuanced than that. Certain places they can electrify faster, other places they can't. So the more we can steer, especially some of these multinational customers who have choices about where they locate and their timing, and I think the more opportunity there actually is to materialize.
Yeah, yeah. It's because it's right at the beginning, is it? People trying a bit of education about what you actually need, having frank conversations. And are you finding a lot more of these conversations, a lot more interest? I mean, we talked a bit in the session. I don't know if anybody joined the last session. We was talking about how the EV transition is picking up pace and demand has never been higher. It's never been a better time. This is a quote from Josh Green at Inspiration Mobility. It's never been a better time to electrify your commercial fleets. Is that reflected in your experience? Obviously, California is kind of leading within the US as well.
I would say so. And so in California, we, over the last several years, have had requirements that fleets and companies knew that they were working towards in terms of electrification. And so, as businesses go, when there is a policy signal set, and I really am a big fan of policy signals, then businesses figure out what is the best business way in order to achieve that objective. So we did find that commercial fleet owners were coming to us as we were all working towards meeting our state targets and saying, okay, practically, how do I execute on this? So even as there are shifts in policy signals, over time, when something is going to be a better economic opportunity, it's going to be better for your communities, I do think the business community will continue to focus on electrification because it ends up being the most affordable solution long term. Now, I think we're all adjusting about how does that look as incentives go away, which just means we have to make just the core business case even stronger.
Yeah, yeah. It's definitely another point we're making as well. Before is making an economic case. It's got to stack up, and I suppose it's there in many use cases. It's there, but in many it's not. But it's going to increase. I mean, it's going to happen. It's just a matter of time. And so I think it's a commercial, huge projected commercial opportunity. Obviously, you've identified as a business, this is where the market's going. Yeah.
I've stumped you. No more questions.
No, I do have. I had another question. I was going to, before I moved to the one on the page, there was another one that prompted. But let's move to that one. So business is increasingly eager to electrify. Yeah, this is kind of related to the question I was wondering. We talk about collaboration, we talk about different stakeholder groups who need to come together, and we've tried to do this in the UK. We'd love to do it in other markets, bringing together utilities, regulators, fleets, and other charge point operators, etc. Who've not used to speaking to each other and having a common language. What's your perspective on that? Obviously, it sounds like you're grasping the nettle to an extent and leading this conversation, but you can't do it alone. No one organisation can do it alone. And what's your reflection on the need for collaboration, but also what's needed to create that right platform so people can collaborate effectively?
All great questions. So I'll start with, we've been working on that collaboration again for decades, and it used to go faster than decades. I think one of the things that has helped in an emerging industry, what everyone's role is sometimes is unclear. And so I think sometimes there's friction in conversations because people aren't sure if they're collaborators or they're competitors, right? But you can't be a competitor when there's no market. So, for example, from a utility perspective, when we first started really focusing on this work, and when I was a regulator, I was working on this, it was, should the utilities be owning the charging infrastructure? We have moved past that in California, where we are really focused on how do we build the grid to support infrastructure wherever that's being built. But some of that clarification around, well, who's doing what, sometimes can make the conversations as less transparent or collaborative as they can be. So I think it's important to especially have the third parties who perhaps don't have a business stake in the outcome, bringing people together and saying, okay, what are some of the issues that collectively benefit all of us from solving? I think it's important. It's also just coming forward with everyone understanding, at minimum, this is what I need to do. And as a utility, we said, no matter what, we've got to make sure there's capacity. So let's focus on that, understand what our customers and others in the ecosystem need. So I just think having forums like this, learning from each other, understanding, and not assuming that people know each other's businesses. When I started doing my first meetings with OEMs as a regulator, they were like, what's this kilowatt hour about, right? And then the utilities were like, what's this thing about? And you realize these massive industries haven't had a requirement to really understand each other very well, but I do think that's changed.
And there's jargon, isn't it?
Oh, a
It's very
lot of
jargonistic
acronyms
as well.
too.
So
Yeah,
for both,
yeah.
the fleet side and OEMs, and so how do we have a translator or a common language is really important as well as.
I mean, I've seen a lot of cross pollination
Yeah.
with people as well. People coming from car companies to work at utilities or vice versa. Our CEO was previously an executive at an automaker, and so she brought with her that perspective and understanding of that industry, which has allowed us to have really successful partnerships with General Motors, Ford, and others, particularly on vehicle to grid.
We're close to time. Is these conversations with OEMs are now taking place much more than they would in the past? It's about electric vehicles. So it's not. I'm understanding that correctly. It's a new conversation you're having with that sector.
Yeah, I say over the last few years, really getting really specific around what is the equipment necessary in order to be able to have vehicles participate in grid services. And I think that's one observation I'll make. The equipment is at different stages of maturity. On the residential side, the vehicles are there. It's about getting customers to adopt. We do have some work still to do in terms of the variation of vehicles on the commercial side. And then the vehicle to grid technology, we're piloting a lot of it, we're doing it, but there are still some things making it challenging at scale. So just the work on EVs is not done.
Yeah.
It is more ahead, I would say, than other types of electrification, but we still got to keep our foot on the pedal, to speak.
Yeah, 100%. And I think your point resonated there that a lot of companies think, oh, we can't electrify. There's no way, we're not ready, but maybe they are. So there's an education piece. I think that's something for us to work together with, with you and other EV100 members to try to get more attention on this. It's a big topic. It's crucial. So and it's not going to be tackled by one session, but although it was a really good session today, and yeah, I look forward to speaking again, Carla. And yeah, just join me in a round of applause for Carla. Thank you very much for your candid. Take care. Okay, thanks again to Carla for that great discussion. We're going to bring now on stage a few panelists to get into a bit more detail. We're welcoming Suji Sullivan, Chief Commercial Officer for Lovink Enertech, which is a Dutch manufacturer of power distribution splice technology, and she's responsible for bringing medium voltage splice technology to the US. We have Dan Delury, Senior Fellow for Climate Energy at Vermont Law School. Dan is former White House Director of Clean Energy and previously held executive level positions in a large electric utility, a clean tech startup, and 2 NGOs. Focused on the intersection between climate change and the electricity system. And Sam Hirsch, who is the North America e-mobility solutions lead at Arcadis, another EV100 member, where he helps clients with transport decarbonisation and electrification. Hi all, very warm welcome. Hope you had a chance to hear the conversation with Carla from backstage as well. But yeah, really pleased to continue the conversation with you all. And I do have a conversation I'd like to put you all into, and perhaps start with you, Suji. What opportunities and benefits do you see, both commercial and environmental, from modernising the grid to support the EV transition? So zooming right out, what are the benefits?
Of modernizing the grid?
Yeah.
Oh, a lot of benefits. I think with that, we can have capacity. I mean, building capacity is the biggest issue right now with the demand that we see on the grid. EV is a big, huge demand, along with AI and data centers. I mean, this is going to continue. This is not just now, but it's going to continue, which is great with the increase in technology's advancement. We're going to see a lot more collaboration, I guess, in utilities and companies that are needing this type of energy as well, and as well as the people. I think this is going to help everyone, but we really need to collaborate and talk about how to get there.
Yeah.
And I work for a company, Lovink, that really is looking at improving the grid from the standpoint of splices. I mean, this sounds like it's a medium voltage product. The real silent killer in the grid, because it's kind of swept away. Nobody talks about it so much, but we can improve the grid because it's, we can live for 50 years without having to get a failure. So if we can modernize the grid and think about ways to improve it today that will make it last for over 50 years, that's the way to kind of think about moving forward and be able to take on the harmonics and all of the type of new technologies that are adding a lot of problems to the grid today. Problems in the sense that these new technologies are adding complexities that we didn't have before. It's improving our lives, but adding complexities that actually create higher frequencies and temperature increases that really cause failures. So we really need to think about that as well as we improve.
Great, thanks, Susie. So if we're going to get these benefits, the grid needs to be resilient.
Yes.
And there's a lot of work to do there as well. So it's not all about upgrade. So over to you, Sam. I guess you're looking a lot at a commercial case, aren't you? You're speaking to companies about why this makes sense commercially. So I wonder if you might cover that, as well as welcome your thoughts on the environmental case as well.
So we're making the environmental and the social case for hardening the grid?
More commercial.
Commercial case?
Yeah. What are you saying to clients or prospective clients? Why should we modernize the grid, or maybe even societally, what's the benefits to modernizing the grid?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think to clients, it would obviously depend on who the client is. I think that's something that Carla was talking about and we heard about in the last, is that there's a lot of stakeholders that come into play here who are coming from different perspectives. And so, if you're speaking to a grid operator, you would talk about downtime and being able to provide service effectively. I think if we're talking to the society as a whole, we would talk about the benefits, economically and socially to having a reliable grid. New York City has one of the most reliable grids, and that came out of the extreme impacts of blackouts in the city over many years and many rate cases pushing for hardening of the grid. And I think you see that in a very reliable grid that, the city runs more effectively and the businesses are able to stay open. And so commercially it benefits, it benefits folks to have a hardened, resilient grid.
Yeah, great. And to turn to you, Dan, I wonder if you had some perspectives on the same question.
Well, I guess, it's great to hear what I just heard, because it's talking about how to modernize the grid. And so I think one of the things to talk about is the role of regulators and government in either helping that or hindering that. And so to address that, I'd sort of like to tell a story about the past and then just make a couple of comments about the present. And I have 20 minutes. Is that how much I have? Okay. All right. Sorry. All right. The short version of the past. Okay. So in around 2001, 2002, a number of us, starting in Washington, were trying to make things happen to establish what we called then a smart grid. Today, grid modernization is the term of art. And the first technology by which to do that was the smart meter. The two-way communications, time-based measurement, basically. So that was, let's say, 2002. Not a lot happened until 2009, when in the Obama Stimulus Act, we managed to secure several $1 billion that was used to jumpstart utility smart meter projects. And so then we enter the next decade, and everyone is all excited about demand response. Two-way power flow. There was a term of art that doesn't exist anymore called prosumer, that customers were going to interact so much with the grid and everything was going to be optimized. Everything was going to be perfectly dynamic. All the information was going to be available and used for that purpose. Well, the meters are mostly in. There are a few places where they're not, but we still don't have ubiquitous time-based pricing. The meters in most cases are not being used to truly modernize the grid. But the light I want to cast on that is the time scale. It takes a long time in a regulated industry and in the electric utility industry to change the system from a capital standpoint. And you could say that during that time that the grid could have been invested in and been prepared for that modernization or some other things which I'll mention in a moment. But in a regulated system, you don't take a leap out there and start investing. You wait until you've got approval to have that. And if the demand is not rising, then that approval, or you probably don't even ask for it in the first place. Okay, so that was 25 years ago that got started. Quick comment right now. We know what's happening in Washington. The EV tax incentive has been pulled back along with everything else. And so I'm not sure what to expect, if anything, from regulators and government right now to help this along. In California last week, the governor said that he's not making up for that $7,500 tax incentive. And if California can't do it, then I don't think anybody else can. And so there are things that maybe can be done. And I feel like I'm not ending on a positive note, but I just think that there's a real challenge ahead. And I used to get asked a lot about whether the grid would be ready for EVs. And I said, sure, that's not a problem. I don't get asked that anymore. I said, is the grid ready for data centers? And that's all that anyone wants to talk about. That's all that regulators want to talk about, in addition to the rise in prices. And so I'm just not sure, and I'm happy to be proven wrong by you guys or the audience. I just don't think there's a lot that's going to happen from the government and regulator sector.
Interesting. Well, just very quickly, I mean, we in our kind of perspective, things like permitting reform and ensure there's no delays in applications. Is that, you don't think these levers, you don't think there's any political appetite to implement them, or is it just you don't think they'll be effective levers?
Yeah, I could have mentioned permitting, and I'm familiar with that, and I've been intimately involved to try to tackle NIMBYism and bananaism, but I'm not sure that will be the critical factor. I think that is going to happen, but I think the investment to put the kind of technology into the grid and have that used and have that be ready to make it more dynamic and accept the EV sector as a true new contributor, not just a user, but a contributor to grid optimization. I'm not so sure. Yeah, so I guess in the absence of that political appetite or the regulation, just to turn to you, Sam, would you see, how do you see we heard a bit from Carla as well in the kind of earlier about how there's increased interest in this and from fleets and from companies. I wonder if you could share your perspective on the conversation between fleets and utilities. I don't know if you have a perspective on that, and what role can the private sector play within itself with the absence of this kind of really strong policy leadership?
Yeah, well, I think that a lot of the impetus for the transition has come from two places amongst private companies. It's been regulations requiring it, specifically in California, the Advanced Clean Fleets rule, which has been pulled back. And it came from better TCO recognition. Much of that better TCO recognition will probably flesh out, especially in certain use cases. TCO being total cost of ownership. But I think that in a lot of cases, things may slow down. And I think that it's going to be more important than ever for utilities to recognize that they hold the keys to unlocking a lot of this work. I think that when you're talking to corporations whose bread and butter is not building EV charging. So if you're not an EV developer, you're a fleet operator who, you know, the CEO probably doesn't think about this for more than 10 seconds a month. Being able to help remove some of the impediments to getting chargers in the ground, and so that when it gets up to that senior decision maker level, instead of it being seen as, oh God, that was a slog and everyone's unhappy, instead it was, oh, that was pleasantly, surprisingly easy. I think that would make a lot of difference. And I think when you see the sorts of things that PG&E is doing, I've worked in PG&E territory, and I can tell you, having worked in other PG&E territories, the Rule 29 team there, the ability to have a consistent project manager who understands the EV industry is really powerful. And so that sort of collaboration that's happening and being pushed, you know, not just at senior levels of utilities, but downstream, so that when you're pushing a project forward, you have someone on the utility side who understands where you're coming from and what you need, and can help be your advocate within the organization. That's really powerful and important. And so I think what it really comes down to, you know, at this stage in the game, is utilities working with the companies that are looking to transition their fleets, being upfront and honest where, hey, you've got a fleet location there, we're not going to get you power for many years, so that those fleet operators can move on and not let it turn into a boondoggle, but really coming to the table and working together where there are opportunities, and, you know, where there is grid availability, you know, some point within a reasonable time frame, or bringing in phased power, you know, as Carla was talking about as well.
Yeah, so nice segue to the next question about phased power, and you know, we talk about grid upgrade, and that's going to be necessary at some point. But there's huge opportunities through optimization of the grid, and Carla cited, you know, that example of being able to meet companies' needs without, you know, grasping that very difficult challenge of grid upgrade. Just to turn to you, Suji, on that. So technologies like smart charging or storage, on-site generation. We talked about virtual power plants in the past as well. How do you see the role they all play in meeting need for more energy from fleets?
So I'm glad you brought this up, because honestly, this whole data center and AI, they're all going after the same electrons. We're all after the same. Everybody wants that. So why not have the EVs also ride on that same wave? You know, to me, there is a positive, because I tend to think kind of optimistically that way. But there is an opportunity, because the demand is so high right now, for these technologies to come through. And I've seen, like, I've worked on a project in collaboration, of course, is the big key, with really good partnerships across the table. One of the companies I worked with was Green Lane in Southern California. The city of Colton is the IPP that was involved, and Green Lane is a consortium of BlackRock Energy, NextEra Energy, BlackRock is the financier, and Daimler Trucks. So that consortium has come up with a 4-megawatt flagship site in Southern California for charging heavy-duty vehicles. And what's really cool about that is they know they don't have enough power, and they've worked with the utility for this. So they're phasing in, bringing in more power. So right now, 4 megawatts, and in due time, another 4 megawatts. So it'll be like a 8-megawatt site. But that takes a lot of coordination across those companies, and working with smart technologies like load management and control. What they used was, I was with ABB when we did this, ABB's SCADA system. Basically, it's a system that we use for making industry efficient in actually managing demand. So we put that, they use that creativity and put that into operation for managing the charging network on the site. So using technology that exists today and finding a creative way to use that technology for improving the site was a key there. And another example that is in Southern California again is Prologis, their site, the Denker site, 96 heavy-duty truck charging site. That's 9 megawatts. It's available today. A lot of people don't realize this stuff is happening today. 96 electric vehicles. And that one is with Maersk. So the Green Lane is Daimler, and now Volvo is a part of that as well. So several OEMs are involved, and then the other one is, and what's really cool about this is I think a lot of these companies are worried about their own sustainability in the future. They're not worried about what the government says. They're really worried about themselves and how they present to their folks. So I think there is an incentive still there. And I feel like we should play on some of the virtual power plants and new technologies that we can gain from this and find ways to manage the loads, just like Carla was speaking about DERMS and being able to manage loads at sites using power for critical power for hospitals when you need it, and manage the power, the demand differently, peak demand differently for the ones for the fleets. So being smart about the power you have, I think, is really important.
If I can just ask one question. On those two projects, was there self-generation involved? Are those the numbers you're citing, or that's the offtake?
So there is some generation. The Maersk location,
Okay.
they're using, they insert power into the site using gas generation.
Okay.
So I know right now that's not the awesome, but that is something that they're using, and it's better. I will tell you, I am really, really passionate about the ports and heavy-duty vehicles, like getting rid of diesel. So if we can find a way, because you have those trucks going, 18-wheelers, they're the amount of pollution, and they're just moving in traffic very slowly and just continuously using diesel. First of all, that's a lot of waste of diesel. So if you could switch it over to electric, and you're still moving very slowly, but you're generating power by your regenerative, braking system of the trucks, you're just creating a much better environment, a better climate for the people and for the future. This is a huge need, I think. And so, yeah, and even if it's gas powered in the beginning, switch it over to solar and battery, and those are getting to be more and more cost effective. Renewables are being deployed. The only issue is they're intermittent. So how do we find batteries or new technologies that are not intermittent, that are actually solid?
Which is where the EVs can come in as on-site storage, one interconnected nationwide battery in an ideal world. I know we're away from it, but I wondered if Dan, you had any comments on, integrating.
One of the things that we're beginning to see with data centers is providing their own generation to meet their own load. I never thought about it in terms of an EV charging center, but basically you're talking about a distributed energy resource that can provide a lot of its own load and put less demand on the grid and actually provide benefits to the grid without burdening it.
Exactly.
Have I given your company pitch there? Okay.
Well, in my old company, yes.
So there's obviously lots of co-benefits to electric vehicles. Very different, aren't they, fundamentally from data centers, in that they're not just drawing electricity, the capacity to put back into the grid, and then lots of benefits from that, commercial benefits from being able to do that, as well as environmental, etc. So that's a really good example of EV100 members, Prologis and Maersk as well. So I'd like to think, making these commitments, companies commit to net zero and they're accountable to it and have to find different ways to get there. So this is really good examples of corporate leadership. But just turning to you, Sam, I think you have some other examples. We talked a lot about California in this session, but also the preceding session. I wonder if there's any other examples of how companies are, electrifying at scale and navigating the grid challenge in other markets.
Yeah, I think I've got two interesting examples. So one is, I think, another EV100 company, Estee Lauder. We've been working with them for a couple years now with their global fleet transition. And I think one of the things that makes commercial fleets difficult is that for the most part, they're company owned, and getting a large scale DC fast charging hub built is challenging. One of the things we really leaned into was the number of employees we found who took their vehicles home for Estee Lauder, and then working through Estee Lauder to set up a program to be able to help folks get chargers at their own homes to help with that transition at a lower capital cost to the company. And the second example I'd bring up is we're working for a consortium developer in Toronto who has been contracted by the Toronto Transit Commission under a P3 contract. And the lead on that is a developer called Power On, not to be confused with Power On, the theme of the week. And essentially, Power On is owned by Toronto Hydro, which is the electric utility there, but it's a non-regulated energy developer. And what that's allowed the team to do is move much more effectively to understand where existing power is available, and maybe not just nameplate capacity on the switchgear, but in the grid, and to be able to integrate battery energy storage systems into plans for charging deployments much more effectively and quickly, because those are coming through a process that the Toronto Hydro understands and a developer that they trust. And in some ways, it means that the utility has a close relationship with that developer. And that's allowed us to do things like get, I want to say 30, 40 buses with no utility upgrade up and running, charging at a depot. And things like that are really powerful. And to be able to see that replicated elsewhere would be, would really, really supercharge the electrification process.
Yeah, great examples. I'm going to turn back to you, Dan, for regulation. I know you said it's quite a challenge in the regulation area, but just to dwell on that for a moment, we talk about the need for innovation. Innovation is needed, but utilities also like reliability. I was wondering if you could share perspective on how regulators can balance experimentation with the need to keep the lights on.
Yeah, I think that's certainly one of the issues that has slowed down the process. People in the technology industry, like my co-panelists here and others throughout the past couple of decades, they talked about death by pilots. And that's because even when something had been proven elsewhere in another state, in another utility, the regulators and sometimes the utility itself had to see it there. They had to do a pilot themselves. And so the process gets dragged out unnecessarily in many cases. And so I think that's what you're asking about, because experimentation, sure, but you don't always need another pilot. Maybe you just need a phase-in of experimentation to see how it fits and tweak it a little bit and then go from there. But if I could, just one more thing on the timeline and with this issue of speed and how long it takes to do things. I mean, we are here at Climate Week. And so, we're talking about technology that is of good use to the grid in terms of greening the grid and so on. But we're not doing things fast enough in any aspect of anything that we're talking about. I mean, we're doing good things, but the magnitude is not there. But most important, the speed is not there. It's like it's totally unrelated. Nothing is synchronized. The timeline and actions to get us to the temperature targets is not related to the timeline of our actions.
Yes, you're the campaign. You're taking the climate goal there. Yeah, our goal to drive climate action fast, and we will draw to a close shortly. And I think that's nice to cue us up for a little bit of a call to action. Then we're lapsing a bit back into the last session. We're in a period of political uncertainty, and it's really difficult to get that traction and to get messages to land. It's incredibly hard politically, as you know better than I do in over here. So. What can we do? What's the next step? We talked about collaboration, but we are a bit limited on time. But maybe just 30 seconds each. Just what can we do to try and accelerate and get this thing moving even more quickly?
Well, I'm happy to yield. I sort of gave my closing remark just a moment ago.
I could not agree more. I think finding the small projects, the small wins that make commercial sense in the private sector and in the public sector where the funding's available to really catalyze new technologies is going to be really important, because the underlying fact is the TCO for electric vehicles, along with renewables and so many other technologies, gets better every day. And the more we deploy it, the better we'll get at it.
I agree. I think innovation is key, and partnerships using that innovation is another key. And I think there is something called energy as a service. There are financial models to help actually invigorate what we're trying to do. from the private sector. And I think we should find those companies and work with them. I think Schneider Electric just announced this week they have $7 billion for community solar projects across the country that they want to deploy. There's several different companies that are really for this, and we don't have to rely on the public sector to do what we need to do, I think.
One short one. Carla is my friend, who you heard from on the previous panel. When she was a regulator, she mentioned she was one of the most respected regulators in the whole country, and regulators in other states looked to see what Carla did. And we need more people like that who understand that system to then take the step and go into utilities, so that that type of person can understand the regulatory system and work with it in a different way than maybe other utility people.
I think we need the public to know that these things still exist today. I think people don't even have a clue that there are 96 electric trucks being charged and utilized at a site. I don't think that's a known entity. I'm just saying.
Okay, that was quite a good haul of call to actions there at the end. So it's about, embracing innovations in services, not just the actual technologies themselves. It's leaning on the private sector leadership in this context. It's about having regulators who are switched on and aware and ready to collaborate. So that's been fascinating, really insightful for me as well, as we get to grips within EV100 on this issue. We're going to be doing more workshops and get into the technicalities of it and work with our members around it. So it's been really useful for me personally. I hope the same for everybody in the audience. I will draw the session to a close. Just please give a round of applause to the panel. And thank you all for your attention, and I hope you enjoy the rest of Climate Week. Thanks again.